Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier, with a presentation that takes a look at what happened when Roosevelt stopped priming the pump, and what really solved the stubborn problem of unemployment in America. The battle with the Supreme Court had made Roosevelt more cautious, and when the economy seemed to be recovering, he began to cut back on the New Deal. The result, however, was that production levels fell back alarmingly. Unemployment spiralled upward again too, and shares were being sold on the stock market at such a rate that it reminded investors of the dark days of 1929. But this was 1937. This was the Roosevelt recession. Some thought that Roosevelt, in cutting back public spending, had stopped priming the pump too soon. Others, though, continued to argue that the New Deal had never been the answer. All it had done was alleviate the worst of the effects of the Depression, and then just a little. But on the whole, it had been a huge waste of public money. What finally rid America of the scourge of unemployment was war. A war that America didn't at first join, but which still got American factories producing armaments to supply Britain and France. So it could be said that it was war that got America working again, though it could also be said that it was the New Deal that had got America used to the role of government in directing the economy. At first, America set out determined to be neutral, and a series of neutrality acts were passed in 1935, 1936, and again in 1937. These made the sale or transport of war materials illegal. Congress was determined to have nothing to do with another European war. Nevertheless, Roosevelt prepared America for possible war, and the size of the army was increased, and the PWA set about building warships, including aircraft carriers. And when war started in Europe, with Hitler's invasion of Poland in 1939, Roosevelt persuaded Congress to accept his policy of cash and carry, which allowed Britain and France to buy armaments from America and carry them back in their own ships, hence cash and carry. Roosevelt's policy was described at the time as benevolent neutrality. America wouldn't declare war on Nazi Germany, but they would help those fighting Hitler and his allies. And when France fell to the Germans, and Britain was looking extremely vulnerable, Roosevelt declared, "We must get these weapons to Britain in sufficient amounts and quickly. We must be the great arsenal of democracy." So, America gave Britain all the aid it could, short of declaring itself hostile to Germany. And despite Roosevelt's words more than a year before about not entering the war, Roosevelt persuaded Congress to agree to conscription, and an act was passed in September 1940. He also extended aid to the Russians after 1941, a harder thing for the Americans to do given the ideological divide. The new policy, that also included Britain, was known as Lend-Lease. Everything from ships, planes and tanks to ammunition and to medical supplies was provided on loan. The idea was that they would be returned or else replaced after the war was won. Then, when America entered the war after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor at the end of 1941, Roosevelt set a target of 45,000 tanks and 60,000 planes a year. Roosevelt established a new agency, the War Production Board, WPB. New factories were built at incredible speed, and the production line proved as efficient as it had in the car plants. So much so that in one factory the materials came in at one end of the plant, and just an hour later a plane appeared at the other end. It was then put on the runway ready to be tested. In 1943, American factories produced 86,000 planes, far exceeding Roosevelt's target. In similar fashion, the Americans built a whole fleet of ships, the Liberty ships, to ship the supplies over to Europe. In total, more than 86,000 tanks, almost 300,000 planes, 6,500 naval ships, 5,400 merchant ships, and 64,500 landing craft were built, plus artillery, guns, ammunitions, and everything else that was needed. America had indeed become the arsenal of democracy. The effect all this had on the economy and on unemployment and then wage rates was quite staggering. Firms made huge profits. But as for unemployment, whilst 9.5 million workers were still unemployed in 1939, by 1943 this had dropped to barely 1 million, and many women were employed too. As for real wages, that is, allowing for inflation, well, average wages shot up by 44% between 1941 and 1945. So, while on the one hand some would say that the 1937 recession seemed to show the need for the two New Deals, others would argue that it really took World War II to solve unemployment. You might get direct questions on either the recession or the impact of World War II. But this presentation should also help you with evaluations on the New Deal as a whole. Now, if you're a regular to my presentations, you'll know you'll get a lot more detail from my ebooks on Amazon. But for this presentation, that's me finished. I'll just thank you for listening and wish you the very best of luck with your studies. Cheers.